My name is Renee. I'm standing outside the courthouse, the autumn air cold and refreshing against my face. The final divorce hearing is over, and I feel a strange sense of calm. It's been a long and arduous journey, but I've finally reached the end. As I look back on the events that led me here, I'm reminded of the many challenges I've faced and the strength I've found within myself. It all started on a quiet morning in Portland, when I woke up before the alarm, my chest tight with anxiety. The hearing was today, and I knew it would be a defining moment in my life. I lived in a small apartment, surrounded by furniture that I had owned for years. The light crept through the thin curtains, casting a pale glow on the room. I sat up slowly, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile peace. On the table by the window, there was a stack of unanswered messages from clients, portrait commissions that I had postponed. I couldn't bring myself to pick up a brush, the weight of the day pressing down on me. I had once been a different person, with a different life. Years ago, I worked long shifts in a city cafeteria, scrubbing plates until my fingers ached. I never imagined that I would one day call myself an artist, but drawing had always been a part of me. It was a way to escape the reality of my life, to create something beautiful in the midst of chaos. But life had other plans for me. I met Ryan, a confident and charming man who seemed to offer me a way out. At first, his attention felt like a rescue. He complimented my drawings and encouraged me to pursue my dreams. We fell in love, and I thought I had found my happily ever after. But as the years passed, things changed. Ryan began to criticize my art, telling me that it was a waste of time and that I needed to be more practical. When money got tight, it was my spending that came under scrutiny, my ambitions that were put on hold. I tried to adjust, to be the wife that he wanted me to be, but it was never enough. The final straw came when I discovered that Ryan had been having an affair with his colleague, Lily. I was devastated, but I refused to let him break me. I decided to take control of my life and file for divorce. The day of the hearing was a blur of emotions. When I walked into the courtroom, I saw Ryan sitting at the table, looking confident and relaxed. Beside him was his mother, Helen, a cold and calculating woman who had always disapproved of me. And on his other side was Lily, looking smug and self-assured. As soon as I sat down, Ryan and his entourage started to make snide remarks about my appearance. They laughed and mocked me, trying to make me feel small and insignificant. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, but I refused to let them get to me. Then, the judge entered the room, and the hearing began. Ryan stood up and presented his case, claiming that our marriage was over and that he deserved a fresh start. He painted me as a lazy and ungrateful wife who had failed to support him. I listened in silence, my heart breaking as I heard him twist the truth. But when it was my turn to speak, something inside me snapped. I stood up, my hands shaking, and began to unbutton my old, worn-out dress. The room fell silent as I revealed the beautiful turquoise dress that I had saved for this moment. It was a symbol of my newfound strength and independence. I looked Ryan in the eye and said, "I am not a burden. I am not property. I am an artist, and I create things that are beautiful and meaningful. I will not be reduced to fit someone else's idea of who I should be." The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers. Ryan's confident facade cracked, and he stared at me in disbelief. Lily's smile vanished, replaced by a look of shock and anger. Helen sat there, her face pale and expressionless. I then presented the evidence that I had gathered, showing Ryan's financial misconduct and his affair with Lily. The judge listened carefully, his expression growing more serious with each piece of evidence. When I finished speaking, the room fell silent. After a long moment, the judge looked at Ryan and said, "Mr. Johnson, the evidence presented in this case is compelling. It is clear that you have engaged in financial misconduct and have been unfaithful to your wife. This court finds you responsible for the dissolution of this marriage and orders you to pay restitution to your wife." Ryan's face turned red with anger and humiliation. He tried to argue, but the judge cut him off. "Your actions have caused significant harm to your wife, and you will be held accountable for them. As the judge pronounced the final ruling, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was over. The marriage that had been a source of pain and suffering for so long was finally dissolved. I was free. Outside the courthouse, I took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. The sun was shining, and the air was filled with the sounds of the city. I knew that my life would never be the same, but I was ready to face the future with courage and determination. On my way home, I took the bus. As I sat by the window, lost in thought, an elderly man climbed aboard from the rear entrance. He was dressed in old, tattered clothes, and his face was lined with worry. He hesitated near the fare reader, patting his pockets with growing confusion. The transit officer noticed him and called out sharply, "Sir, you need to pay your fare." The man looked up, his eyes filled with desperation. "I don't have it. I lost everything." A ripple of discomfort moved through the bus. Some passengers turned away, while others watched with thinly veiled impatience. The officer shook his head and reached for the door control. "Rules are rules. You'll have to get off." But I couldn't just sit there and watch. I stood up and said, "I'll pay." The officer looked at me, surprised. "You don't know him. You could be inviting trouble." I didn't care. I reached into my bag and tapped my card against the reader. The green light flashed, and the officer stepped back. "Take a seat," he muttered to the man. The elderly man turned toward me, his eyes wide with gratitude. "Thank you," he said softly. "You didn't have to." I smiled at him. "It's okay. We all need a little help sometimes." A few stops later, the man rose and shuffled toward the door. He paused and looked back at me, holding my gaze for a moment. Then he disappeared into the crowd outside. I returned to my seat, feeling a strange sense of peace. I realized that in that moment, I had done something good, something that had made a difference in someone's life. It was a small act of kindness, but it had the power to change everything. When I arrived at my destination, I found myself in front of a beautiful house surrounded by a wrought iron gate. It was the home of the client I had been commissioned to paint a portrait for. I rang the bell, and a young woman answered the door. She looked me up and down, her expression cold and judgmental. "Yes?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I'm Renee. I'm here to paint Ethan," I said, trying to sound confident. The woman studied me for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in. David is busy. Ethan is waiting." I followed her into the house, feeling out of place. The interior was quiet and luxurious, with polished floors and expensive artwork on the walls. In the living room, a small boy sat cross-legged on the floor, playing with a toy train. He looked up when he saw me, his face lighting up with a smile. "You're the artist," he said, standing up. "That's right," I replied, returning his smile. "You must be Ethan." He nodded proudly. "I'm 8. Before I could say anything else, my gaze drifted past him and I froze. Seated on the far side of the room in a high-backed chair was the elderly man from the bus. He looked nothing like he had earlier that day. Gone were the torn clothes and the plastic bag. He wore a tailored suit, his shoes were polished, and his hair was neatly combed. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then the man inclined his head slightly, a faint, knowing expression on his face. "Renee," he said, as if we were old friends. My breath caught in my throat. "You." Ethan glanced between us. "That's my grandpa, Henry. He's a lawyer." The woman who had let me in cleared her throat. Henry Thompson, Ethan's grandfather. The name landed heavily. I had heard of Henry Thompson, a once legendary attorney known for his integrity and his unwavering commitment to justice. Henry watched me carefully, as if measuring what I might say. "I didn't recognize you," I managed to say. "Understandable," he replied mildly. "Appearances can be misleading." Just then, a man entered the room. He was tall and well-dressed, with a kind and gentle expression. "You must be Renee," he said, extending his hand. "I'm David Thompson, thank you for coming on such short notice." I shook his hand. "Of course." Before anything else could be said, the woman reappeared at David's side. She slipped her arm through his without looking at him, her attention fixed squarely on me. "I'm Sarah, David's wife." The hostility was immediate. Sarah's eyes flicked to my dress, her mouth tightening. "You're younger than I expected." "I'm here to work," I replied evenly. Sarah smiled without warmth. "We value professionalism in this house." Henry shifted slightly in his chair. "She helped me earlier today," he said quietly. Sarah's eyes snapped to him. "Henry." He met her gaze without flinching. "On the bus." David frowned. "What bus?" "It's nothing," Sarah said quickly. "Henry tends to exaggerate." Henry said nothing more, but his attention remained on me, intent and oddly protective. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Ethan sensed it, his smile fading slightly as he clutched his toy train. I felt it too, the way something unspoken pressed against the edges of conversation. I set my bag down carefully. "Shall we get started?" I asked. David nodded. "Yes, let's." As we moved toward the space where I would work, I felt the unease deepen. I couldn't yet name it, but it lingered in the glances exchanged, in Sarah's rigid posture, and in Henry's measured calm. This house, for all its beauty, was holding something back, and I had a growing sense that I had stepped into the middle of it. As I began to paint, the room seemed to recede. The careful arrangement of furniture, the quiet tension beneath the polished surfaces, even Sarah's watchful presence at the edge of the house, all of it softened into background noise. What remained was the canvas, the boy seated patiently before me, and the steady rhythm of my breathing. Ethan sat on a stool near the window, his favorite stuffed bear tucked under one arm. He watched me with open curiosity, occasionally shifting his weight, but mostly holding still with the earnest seriousness only children could manage. The afternoon light fell across his face, catching in his hair, warming his expression. I lifted my brush and made the first strokes, gentle and sure. With them came the familiar drift inward, a sense of peace and clarity. I thought about my own childhood, growing up in a small apartment with a single mother who worked long hours to make ends meet. Money had been tight, and there were many things that I couldn't have. But I had always had my art, a way to express myself and to escape the harsh realities of my life. I remembered the first time I drew a portrait, a simple sketch of a friend. It was like a light had gone on inside me, and I knew that this was what I wanted to do with my life. But as I got older, the practicalities of life got in the way. I had to work to support myself, and there was no time or money for art. It wasn't until I met Ryan that I started to think about art again. He encouraged me to pursue my dreams, and for a while, I believed that I could. But as our relationship deteriorated, my art became a source of conflict. Ryan didn't understand why I needed to spend so much time on it, and he resented the fact that it took away from our relationship. I tried to compromise, to find a balance between my art and my marriage. But in the end, it wasn't enough. I realized that I had to choose between my dreams and my relationship, and I chose my dreams. Ethan's voice cut gently through my thoughts. "Does it hurt?" he asked seriously, "when people look sad?" I paused, considering. "Sometimes," I said honestly, "but it also helps to understand them." He nodded as if this made sense. He adjusted his bear and sat straighter. "You can paint me happy." "I'm happy right now." Warmth spread through my chest, unexpected and grounding. I returned to the canvas, my strokes sure now, infused with something steadier than memory. Ethan's presence was uncomplicated. He didn't know my past. He didn't weigh my worth. He simply existed, offering trust without conditions. As the portrait began to take shape, I felt a quiet reassurance settle in me. The years of endurance, the choices shaped by necessity rather than desire, had not erased my ability to create or to care. They had only sharpened it. For the first time in a long while, I did not feel the need to justify my survival. I simply painted. Henry waited until the house quieted. Ethan had been taken upstairs, his evening routine carried out with careful normality. David's voice drifted briefly from another room, low and distracted, then faded. Sarah's footsteps moved across the floor with clipped precision before disappearing behind a closed door. Only then did Henry rise from his chair in motion, subtly for me to follow him. We stopped in a narrow hallway lined with framed photographs, vacation celebrations, moments staged to look effortless. Henry studied one for a moment, then turned to me. "You helped me today," he said softly. I nodded. "It didn't feel like much." "It was," Henry replied. He lowered his voice. "And that's why I'm asking you now." I hesitated. "Asking me what?" Henry glanced toward the staircase, then back at me. "I believe Sarah is planning something. Something illegal, dangerous." The word hung between us. I searched his face for signs of confusion, of exaggeration. I found none. His eyes were clear, focused in a way that contradicted every rumor I had heard. "David trusts her completely," Henry continued. "That trust is being used against him, against Ethan." My pulse quickened. "What makes you think that?" "I've seen things," he said. "Documents hidden where they shouldn't be. Conversations that stop when I enter a room. Devices installed under the pretense of convenience." His mouth tightened. "She believes I don't notice that I'm fading." I felt a chill move through me. "Are you sure?" "I'm not wrong," he said quietly. "But I need proof." I understood what he was asking before he said it. "A camera," I said. "Yes," he said. "Discreet, temporary, somewhere in her study, just long enough to confirm what I already know." My instinct was to refuse. The request crossed lines I had never imagined stepping over. Privacy, legality, consequences. I thought of the courtroom, of judgment, of how easily intentions could be twisted. "I don't want to be part of something that could hurt you," I said carefully, "or Ethan." "That's exactly why I'm asking you," Henry replied. "You don't belong to this house. You see it clearly." I looked down the hallway again. The polished frames, the silence, the child asleep upstairs. After a long moment, I nodded once. "If we do this," I said, "we do it carefully and only to confirm the truth." Henry inclined his head. "That's all I ask." The installation took minutes. Henry had already obtained a small camera, no larger than a paperclip, designed to blend into its surroundings. My hands shook slightly as I placed it behind a row of books on a shelf in Sarah's study, angling it toward the desk. We tested the feed briefly, then powered it down. I left soon after, the house closing behind me with a weight that lingered long after I stepped back onto the quiet street. That night I could not sleep. I sat at the small table in my apartment, the city humming faintly beyond the window, and opened the feed on my phone. For a moment, the screen showed nothing but the empty study. Shadows shifted as the camera adjusted. Then the door opened. Sarah entered, her movements quick and efficient. She closed the door behind her and sat at the desk, opening a laptop. The screen reflected faintly in the camera's lens, unreadable, but I leaned closer anyway, my heart beginning to race. Sarah spoke, and another voice answered through the speakers. A man, calm and controlled. "Everything is in place," Sarah said. There was no hesitation in her tone. "He signed the contracts without reading them. Thought it was routine." The man chuckled softly. "And the recordings?" "I've been collecting them," Sarah replied. "Every conversation, every admission. He won't see it coming." My stomach tightened. "What about the old man?" the voice asked. Sarah paused. He's a problem, but manageable. People already think he's unstable. And the child? Sarah exhaled sharply. Ethan won't be touched. He's leverage, not collateral. The words landed like a blow. And when it's done? The man continued. When David is ruined, Sarah said, financially, publicly. Then I walk away with everything. I felt cold spread through my limbs. Contracts, recordings, financial ruin. The pieces aligned with frightening clarity. This was not paranoia. It was planning. The feed went dark as Sarah shut the laptop and left the room. I stared at the blank screen, my breath shallow, my thoughts racing. Henry had been right. Worse than that, he had been careful, measured, and now there was proof. My gaze drifted to the door of my apartment, then to the quiet room around me. I thought of Ethan upstairs in his bed, trusting the world without question.